Give us this day our daily bread. Matthew 6:11. You never forget the moment your world changes. For me, it was a grey Thursday afternoon, standing in the cracked parking lot of the only factory I'd ever known. The gates were locked, the office windows dark. In my hand, a pink slip fluttered in the wind, a single sheet that ended 42 years of honest work. Around me, men and women I'd called friends for decades shuffled away in silence, shoulders bent, dreams scattered like autumn leaves. I had just turned 70. My wife had gone home to the Lord years before. The pension we'd counted on was wiped out with the company's bankruptcy. All I had left was my faith, and a small loaf of bread I'd picked up from the bakery that morning, thinking it would be enough for dinner. I walked to the old stone church across the street, the one where I'd ushered at Mass, and handed out bulletins with a smile. I sat on the cold bench outside, clutching the bread, and prayed for every family who'd lost their livelihood that day. That evening, I lit a candle before the tabernacle, whispering, "Give us this day our daily bread." And I meant every word. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord. Colossians 3:23. I was born into a family where faith and hard work were woven into every breath. My father was a factory man. He clocked in before dawn each day, his hands rough but steady, his spirit unwavering. My mother was the heart of our home and the soul of our parish. Her prayers and kindness, a quiet but powerful force that held us all together. Growing up in that blue-collar neighborhood, the factory wasn't just a place to earn a living. It was the heartbeat of our town, the thread that wove us all together in a tapestry of shared hopes and struggles. From my earliest memories, Sunday Mass was the anchor of our week, the sacred time when the community gathered to give thanks and seek strength. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery mingled with the scent of incense in the church, a reminder of God's presence in the ordinary and the holy. I married young, full of hope and determination, ready to build a life grounded in faith and family. My wife, Mary, was the light of my life, her gentle faith a constant source of strength and comfort. Together, we raised 3 children in the same faith that had sustained us since childhood. On quiet mornings before my shift, the quiet mornings before my shifts at the factory, kneeling at the kitchen table with Mary, whispering prayers for our family and the day ahead. Those prayers became a rhythm, a quiet offering before the noise and bustle of the factory floor. It was in those moments that I felt closest to God, trusting Him to guide and protect us through whatever challenges lay ahead. For over 40 years, I worked at that factory. The machines hummed steadily, the whistles blew to mark the shifts, and life went on in its steady, predictable way. I wasn't just a worker. I was part of a community. We shared birthdays, baptisms, weddings, and funerals. We celebrated together and mourned together. I served as an usher at Sunday Mass, greeting familiar faces with a nod and a smile, offering a small gesture of welcome and belonging. On weekends, I volunteered at the parish food pantry, quietly slipping loaves of bread and canned goods into the hands of neighbors who struggled to make ends meet. I never sought thanks or recognition. The joy was in the giving itself, in the simple act of sharing God's blessings with those in need. When Mary passed away 10 years ago, the parish wrapped its arms around me in a way I will never forget. The grief was deep and raw, but so was the faith she left behind, a faith that sustained me through the darkest nights. My children had grown and moved away, building their own lives, But I found purpose in my small acts of service, helping at the food pantry, attending daily mass, and spending precious time with my grandchildren whenever I could. Those moments with family and faith were the balm that soothed my aching heart. I had planned to retire soon, looking forward to quiet days filled with prayer, family, and community. The modest pension from the factory was a promise of security, a reward for decades of faithful labor. The factory was more than a job. It was a legacy, a foundation for our family and our parish. It was where I had forged lifelong friendships, where I had learned the dignity of honest work, and where my faith had been tested and strengthened through countless challenges. The factory was the town's lifeblood. Generations of families had worked there, and the parish community was built around it. The rhythm of life was tied to the factory whistle, the steady hum of machines, and the shared hope for a better tomorrow. It was a place where faith and labor intertwined, where Sunday Mass and Monday shifts were parts of the same sacred journey. But I never imagined that foundation could crumble so suddenly. The factory, the town's heartbeat, the place where generations had worked and prayed together, closed its doors without warning. It was as if the heart of our community had stopped beating. The news came like a thunderclap. Bankruptcy, layoffs, no severance, no pension. Families were left scrambling, dreams shattered overnight. Yet through it all, my faith remained. It was woven into every fiber of my being, a quiet strength that carried me through the darkest days. I held on to the words of Colossians, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord." Even when the work ended, the calling did not. I understood that my labor was never just for man, but for God, and that gave me a dignity no pink slip could take away. In those years, I learned that faith is not just about comfort. It's about endurance, humility, and hope. It's about finding grace in the bread we break and the prayers we share. Though the factory's machines fell silent, the spirit of our community lived on, in the pews, in the food pantry, and in the hearts of those who refused to give up. I found that even in loss, God's presence never abandons us. It simply calls us to new ways of serving, loving, and trusting. Looking back, I see how those years shaped me, not just as a worker or a parishioner, but as a man of faith who learned to lean on God's promises when all else seemed lost. The factory was more than a place of employment. It was a classroom where I learned lessons of patience, charity, and quiet strength. And though the doors have closed, the lessons remain, etched deeply into my heart. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to act. Proverbs 3:27. The whispers began quietly, like a low murmur beneath the steady hum of the factory machines. Rumors of financial trouble swirled among the workers, talk of missed payments, late shipments, and mounting debts. But management, with practiced calm, assured us all that our jobs were safe. "This is just a temporary setback," they said. "The company will pull through." We wanted to believe them. We had to. For many of us, the factory was not just a job. It was the foundation of our families, our community, and our very identity. For weeks, I watched as hope and fear battled in the eyes of my co-workers. Some clung to faith and routine, others whispered prayers in the break room, while a few grew restless, their faces etched with worry. I tried to keep spirits up, reminding everyone that God walks with us through every trial. I organized prayer circles before shifts, hoping to weave faith into the fabric of our shared uncertainty. But beneath the surface, anxiety deepened. The factory was more than a place of employment. It was a symbol of stability. It was where fathers taught sons the value of honest labor, where friendships were forged over lunch breaks and shared hardships. Many of us had spent our entire adult lives there. It was hard to imagine that it could simply vanish overnight. Then came that fateful Friday. The day began like any other, with the clang of the factory bell and the shuffle of boots on concrete. But when we arrived at the gates, they were locked tight. A notice was posted on the entrance. The company had declared bankruptcy. The words hit like a hammer. No severance, no pension, no warning. Just a cold, official statement that our livelihoods had been stripped away overnight. I stood there, pink slip trembling in my hand, surrounded by faces frozen in shock and disbelief. The factory, which had been the heartbeat of our town for generations, was silent. The machines were still. The dreams of decades lay shattered on the pavement. The betrayal cut deep, not just from the company, but from the system that allowed it to happen. We had worked faithfully, given our strength and time, only to be cast aside. I felt anger, yes, but also a profound sadness. How could those who held power turn their backs on the very people who built their wealth? It was a wound that went beyond money. It was a wound to our dignity and trust. In the days that followed, I tried to rally the workers. We gathered in church halls and community centers, speaking in hushed tones about petitions, legal advice, and public pressure. I reached out to local officials, hoping to find someone who would listen, someone who would stand with us. But many were discouraged or afraid. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on them like a heavy fog. Some had families to feed, bills to pay, and little energy left to fight. Others feared retaliation, or simply felt powerless against the machinery of corporate law. The sense of betrayal was compounded by the silence of those who could have helped. Our elected representatives offered vague promises but little action. The unions, once a powerful voice, seemed overwhelmed or unwilling to confront the company's collapse. It felt as if the very institutions meant to protect workers had abandoned us in our hour of need. Worse still, some began to blame me for raising false hope. "You're stirring trouble," they said. "Faith won't pay the bills." The very prayers I offered to bind us together were dismissed as naive or dangerous. It was a bitter pill to swallow, feeling isolated when all I wanted was to bring light into the darkness. The parish community, which had been a source of strength, began to fray under the strain. The Sunday gatherings that once overflowed with song and prayer began to thin. Some drifted away, their faith shaken by the harsh realities of loss and betrayal. Others turned inward, angry at God, questioning why He would allow such suffering. I sat in the empty pews, feeling the weight of their absence and the silence that replaced their voices. Meanwhile, the parish food pantry, once a quiet place of charity, became a lifeline for more and more families. The shelves that had been stocked for occasional need grew bare, as neighbors who once gave now came to receive. I helped distribute what little we had, watching the lines grow longer each week. The sting of humiliation was sharp. I, who had spent years quietly giving bread to others, now found myself unable to provide for my own family, let alone the community I loved. The emotional toll was heavy. I felt the sting of humiliation and helplessness. How could I, who had always been a provider, now feel so powerless? How could I comfort my children and grandchildren when I was struggling to find hope myself? The betrayal was not just financial. It was deeply personal. It shook the foundation of my faith and my sense of self. I wrestled with feelings of abandonment. not just by my employer, but by friends and neighbors who retreated into their pain. The community that had once been a source of strength now seemed fractured and fragile. I wondered if I was alone in this struggle, if my faith was enough to carry me through the storm. Yet, even in the depths of betrayal, a small spark remained. The words of Proverbs echoed in my heart. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to act. I knew that despite the pain, I could not withhold kindness, prayer, or hope. It was in these acts, however small, that God's grace would find a way. So I continued to pray, to serve, and to believe that justice, though delayed, would come. The path ahead was uncertain, but I held fast to the promise that no trial is without purpose, and no sorrow without hope. In the quiet moments, I found solace in the Mass, in the sacraments, and in the presence of the saints who had endured suffering before me. I remembered the stories of endurance, humility, and grace that filled the pages of Scripture. I clung to the hope that God's justice would one day prevail, not always in the way the world expects, but in His perfect timing. Though the betrayal left scars, it also revealed the strength of faith lived quietly in the hearts of ordinary people. It showed me that even in loss, there is the possibility of redemption, and that the smallest acts of kindness can become beacons of light in the darkest times. My God, why have you forsaken me? Psalm 22:1. The church was quiet, the soft glow of candlelight flickering against the stained glass windows as I sat alone in the back pew after Mass. My hands were nothing, no bread to give, no words to offer, only a heart heavy with grief and doubt. The familiar scent of incense and old wood surrounded me, but instead of comfort, it seemed to echo the emptiness inside. I found myself asking the hardest question of all. Had my years of hard work, my faithful service, and my quiet acts of kindness meant anything at all? Had all my prayers, my sacrifices, and my trust in God been in vain? The factory's closing had stripped away more than a paycheck. It had shaken the very foundation of my faith and identity. I prayed for my children and grandchildren, the future I had hoped to protect. I feared I had failed them, that the security I thought I was building had crumbled like dust. Would they remember me as a man of faith, or as one who could not provide? The weight of that fear pressed down on me, almost suffocating. In the stillness, I opened my worn Bible to the Psalms of Lament, those raw, honest cries of the heart that have comforted the broken for centuries. Psalm 22, Psalm 55, Psalm 88. They spoke my pain aloud. I wept quietly, tears falling onto the pew, feeling the loneliness and despair that only God seemed to witness. I wondered if God was listening. Was He near, or had He turned away? Was the bread I had given away, the love I had shared, all for nothing? The silence was deafening. Yet even in the depths of my doubt, I found myself returning to prayer, not because I had answers, but because prayer was all I had left. Sometimes the words failed me. Sometimes I could only sit in silence, letting my heart speak what my lips could not. I remembered the saints who had walked through darkness before me, their faith tested and refined by suffering. Their example gave me a fragile hope, that God's presence is often hidden in the silence, that faith endures even when it feels abandoned. Though the night was long and the pain deep, I held on to the smallest flicker of trust. I knew that this moment of spiritual low was not the end, but a passage, a dark valley through which I must walk to reach the light beyond. And so I stayed in that quiet church, hands empty but heart open, waiting for the dawn, for I know the plans I have for you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. Some days, hope feels like a fragile thread, barely holding on amid the weight of loss and uncertainty. But on one quiet morning, as I was cleaning out my locker at the now silent factory, I stumbled upon something unexpected. A small, forgotten envelope tucked behind a loose panel. It was yellowed with age, its edges worn from years of neglect. Inside was a handwritten thank you note from a co-worker I had quietly helped during a difficult time, along with a prayer card folded carefully beside it. The words on the card, worn from years of folding and unfolding, stirred something deep within me. A reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness ripple outward in ways we may never fully see. That simple discovery felt like a message from God, a gentle whisper in the midst of despair. It reminded me that my faith and service had not been in vain, that the bread I had shared, both literal and spiritual, had touched lives beyond my sight. I held the note close, the handwriting familiar, the gratitude heartfelt. It was a tangible sign that my quiet efforts mattered, that God's grace had been working through me all along. A few days later, while volunteering at the parish food pantry, I struck up a conversation with a fellow parishioner. She told me about a new grant available to support community kitchens, an opportunity to provide meals for those struggling in our town. The idea stirred a cautious hope. What if I could take the small act of sharing bread and turn it into something bigger? Something that could nourish not just a handful of neighbors, but many. The thought filled me with cautious hope and a renewed sense of purpose. Encouraged by my priest and my family, I began to explore this opportunity with care and prayer. Together, we gathered information, filled out applications, and crafted a plan that highlighted the urgent needs of our community. Families struggling to put food on the table, elderly neighbors isolated by hardship, children going to bed hungry. I drew on my decades of experience at the factory and my years volunteering at the food pantry to paint a picture of a community ready to come together in support and service. The process was not without challenges. There were forms to complete, meetings to attend, and moments when doubt crept in. I questioned whether I was up to the task, whether my small efforts could truly make a difference. But each step forward felt like a quiet answer to prayer. I felt as if God was multiplying my small offering, the loaf of bread I once held in my hands, into something far greater than I could have imagined. During this time, my family rallied around me, offering encouragement, practical help, and their own prayers. My grandchildren helped me bake bread, their laughter filling the kitchen and reminding me of the joy that can be found even in difficult times. My priest provided spiritual guidance, reminding me that God often works through humble beginnings to bring about His plans. He encouraged me to trust in God's timing and to remain faithful, even when the path seemed unclear. This revelation, that even in the midst of loss, there is a future filled with hope, became a turning point in my journey. It was as if the darkness that had clouded my heart was lifting, replaced by a gentle light that illuminated a new path. I realized that my story was not over. It was simply entering a new chapter, one filled with possibility and grace. With faith as my guide, I embraced this new calling. The small acts of kindness that had sustained me through hardship now had the potential to grow into a beacon of hope for the entire community. I envisioned a place where neighbors could gather, share a meal, and find comfort in one another's company. A place where the broken could be mended and the hungry fed, not just in body, but in spirit. In the quiet moments of reflection, I felt a deep peace settle over me. I understood that God's plans, though sometimes hidden and mysterious, are always for our good. The journey through loss and betrayal had brought me to this place of revelation, where hope was rekindled and faith renewed. As I prepared to take the next steps, I whispered a prayer of gratitude. Thank you, Lord, for the bread that sustains me, for the hands that reach out in love, and for the future you have promised. May this small offering become a blessing for many. And with that prayer, I stepped forward, ready to serve, to give, and to trust in the unfolding of God's perfect plan. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Galatians 6:9. With the grant approved and a renewed sense of purpose, I began gathering a small group of former co-workers and parish volunteers. Together, we transformed the church basement into a warm, welcoming space. A place where people could come not only for a meal, but for companionship, comfort, and hope. It was humble at first. Folding tables, mismatched chairs, and the soft glow of string lights. But it was ours. And it was a start. Each week, we prepared a community meal, inviting everyone: unemployed workers, elderly neighbors, struggling families, and even those who had drifted away from the church, to break bread together. The invitation was simple but sincere. Come as you are, no questions asked, no judgments made. The meal became a gathering of souls, seeking nourishment for both body and spirit. I found joy in baking bread with my grandchildren, teaching them the prayers my mother had taught me long ago. As the dough rose beneath our hands, I shared stories of faith, endurance, and the importance of giving. Their laughter filled the kitchen, a reminder that even in hardship, life's simple blessings endure. The prayers we whispered over the bread became a sacred ritual, connecting generations and weaving our family's faith into every loaf. Serving alongside friends and neighbors, I discovered a wellspring of strength within myself. Even when my own cupboards were bare, I felt rich in grace and purpose. The act of giving, no matter how small, became a source of renewal. Each smile, each word of thanks, was a seed of hope planted in the fertile soil of community. One afternoon, moved by a spirit of forgiveness rather than bitterness, I wrote a letter to the company's former CEO. I did not write to accuse or condemn, but to offer prayers for his heart and to invite him to visit our community meal. I wanted him to see the faces of those affected by the factory's closure and to understand the power of grace and reconciliation. It was a small gesture, but it brought me peace. The response was unexpected. The CEO replied with humility and gratitude, expressing a desire to make amends in whatever way he could. He visited the meal once, quietly observing, and later donating to the food pantry. It was a moment of redemption, not just for him, but for all of us who had suffered loss. Through it all, I learned that endurance is not about bearing burdens alone, but about leaning on one another and on God's mercy. The community meal became more than food on a table. It became a testament to faith lived in action, a living prayer of hope and healing. As the weeks passed, the church basement filled with warmth and laughter. Strangers became friends, and the broken found solace in shared stories and shared bread. I realized that though the factory had closed, the spirit of that community was alive and thriving in this new place of gathering. In serving others, I found my own wounds beginning to heal. The bitterness of betrayal softened, replaced by a quiet joy rooted in grace. Each loaf of bread baked, each meal served, was a reminder that God's love multiplies what we offer, turning scarcity into abundance. And so, with faith steady and heart open, I continued this work, not for recognition or reward, but because it was the path God had laid before me. In giving, I received. In serving, I was renewed. And in every shared meal, I saw the face of Christ. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. Luke 1:53. The grant was approved, and with it came a new chapter for our community. What began as a humble effort in the church basement blossomed into a weekly tradition that brought people together from every corner of our town. The community meal was no longer just an act of charity. It became a symbol of resilience, hope, and faith in action. Former co-workers, many of whom had been adrift since the factory's sudden closure, found new purpose in volunteering. They arrived early to help set tables, prepare food, and greet guests with warm smiles. For many, this was more than just service. It was a restoration of dignity. After months of uncertainty and loss, they were once again contributing to something meaningful, something that mattered. The meal drew a diverse crowd: elderly neighbors, struggling families, young parents, and even those who had drifted away from the church. The atmosphere was one of quiet joy and mutual respect. People shared stories, laughter, and prayers, finding comfort in the simple act of breaking bread together. One of the most profound moments came when the company's former CEO, moved by the letter I had written, made a visit to the meal. He arrived quietly, without fanfare, and took a seat among the guests. His presence was a humble acknowledgement of the pain caused by the factory's closure. Later, he offered a donation to the food pantry and spoke softly to some of the workers, apologizing for the hardships they had endured. That moment of reconciliation was powerful, not just for me, but for everyone present. It reminded us all that justice is not only found in courts or contracts, but also in humility, mercy, and the willingness to make amends. The CEO's gesture was a sign that even in brokenness, redemption is possible. My grandchildren, who often helped me bake bread and serve meals, witnessed faith in action. They saw how quiet perseverance, kindness, and generosity could transform lives. Their eyes lit up as they learned that faith is not just about words, but about living out love in tangible ways. I prayed that these lessons would take root in their hearts and guide them throughout their lives. The spirit of our town was renewed, not by money or power, but by shared bread and prayer. The community meal became a beacon of hope, a place where wounds were tended and spirits lifted. It was a living testament to the truth that God fills the hungry with good things and sends the rich away empty. As I reflected on this journey, I thought of the miracle of the loaves and fishes, how a small boy's simple offering fed thousands through the grace of Christ. I saw our humble meal in the same light, a small gift multiplied by faith and love into something far greater than we could have imagined. This experience deepened my understanding of God's providence. It taught me that even when life strips away what we hold dear, God can use our brokenness to bring about healing and renewal. The factory's closure was a painful loss, but it became the soil from which new life grew. In the quiet moments after each meal, as the last guest departed and the lights dimmed, I would sit in the empty church basement and whisper a prayer of gratitude. For the strength to endure, for the grace to forgive, and for the hope that sustains us all. Though the road had been long and difficult, I found peace in knowing that justice and redemption are not always swift or easy. They often come through the patient work of love, the courage to forgive, and the faith to trust in God's timing. And so, with a heart full of thanksgiving, I continue to serve, to pray, and to believe that even the smallest acts of kindness can change the world. One loaf, one meal, one prayer at a time. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Matthew chapter 5:6. As the last of the guests depart and the church basement grows quiet, I sit back in my chair, watching the fading glow of candlelight dance across the walls. The echoes of laughter and prayer still linger in the air, a sacred melody that fills the room with warmth and peace. Families gather their things, children clutching small loaves of bread we bake together, their faces bright with joy and hope. In these moments, I realize that justice did not come through courts or pensions. It came through love multiplied, through hands that reached out, hearts that forgave, and faith that endured. The legal battles and bitter losses faded into the background, overshadowed by the simple, profound truth that grace and mercy can transform even the deepest wounds. I think of the words of Saint Francis of Assisi, who said, "It is in giving that we receive." How true this has been in my life. In giving bread to others, I have found nourishment for my own soul. In serving those in need, I have been served in ways I never expected. The community meal, born from loss and pain, has become a wellspring of hope and healing. The factory closed. The machines fell silent. But the bread multiplied. In each loaf, I found Christ, broken, shared, and risen among us. The bread that once sustained my family and neighbors now feeds a larger family, a community bound not by circumstance, but by love. As I sit here, the sound of bread breaking fills the silence, a quiet, sacred rhythm that reminds me of the miracle of the loaves and fishes. It is a sound of life, of faith made visible, of God's abundant provision. I whisper a prayer of gratitude, not just for the bread on the table, but for the bread of life that sustains us all, for the strength to endure, the courage to forgive, and the hope that carries us forward. In this humble church basement, surrounded by the faces of those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, I find peace. A peace that surpasses understanding, rooted in the knowledge that no loss is wasted when carried with faith, and no act of love is ever forgotten.